Shawndel. Oh, and it did. There she is.
We can't
hear you though. There you are. You need to turn your mic back on. It's you. Still nothing? Shows you're working. Nope. And I have you unmuted on my end.
Can you hear me now?
No. We hear you now.
Oh, you do? Good. Okay.
Yeah, we're good. We're all good.
Sweet.
Well, nothing like 8:57 and all of the technical difficulties are working. Can everyone see the slide deck too, just to make sure that that part's good? All right, so now the only technical difficulty will be whether or not Erin's voice will make it a full hour. I've done all the things. I don't feel sick. That's like the worst part of it. If I felt sick, I feel like that would be, you know what I mean? Like I would be one thing, but it's like all right here. And I've got like that dry, yucky cough. So I will be very frequently going on mic, off mic if I can, if I have to cough. But otherwise, I feel fine. Like I went for a 3-mile walk this morning. Slept good last night. I mean, I may have taken a melatonin, but I slept good last night. It wasn't like I was coughing all through the night. It's just yesterday afternoon this hit and it hasn't gotten better. So I drank my lemon and my honey and my hot water this morning. We're gonna make it work.
I love it.
If nothing else, I'm just gonna throw it to you guys to just keep you guys know what we're talking about. So you guys will just be my voice when I need one.
Just fill the time.
You don't have the
Yeah.
vid, do you, Erin?
I don't think so. We're just gonna, because I don't feel, and it's only in my
2022.
in my throat. What'd you say, Brian?
That's very 2022 to have the COVID.
Well,
Keep up with the times.
I'm not exactly a trendsetter in my own right, Brian. I'm usually a little behind the times if I need to be.
What about allergies? Do you get spring?
Yeah, I think that's what it
flare-ups?
really is. Yeah, I think it's just allergies.
We have strep floating around my house for the second time this month, and I'm pretty sure by noon today I will have a positive test for myself. So I get it.
I'm glad you're there.
Yeah, right? I know,
Yeah.
like, this week is so full with so many things. I'm like, I don't have time to be sick. I don't think I've ever in 13 years of being a parent asked the doctor for like sympathy medication.
Just in case. Can I just get some just in case
Please
stuff?
just medicate me too. I don't have time for this. And she laughed at me, rightfully so. And yeah, here we are 48 hours later. And I'm like, oh yeah, I'll see you in a little bit.
Yeah. I love that. Sympathy medication. I'm going to steal that phrase.
It works. So you might want to find a new term.
Well, but I'm feeling the same way. I'm like looking at my schedule for the week and being like, yeah, this can't happen. This isn't going to happen. We're just mind over mattering this whole thing. It'll be fine. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, we are top of the hour and we've got 37 people on, 38 as I watch the clock continue to join. And I try very hard to because I know we've got a lot of good stuff to talk about. And so I want to make sure we give you guys enough time to make sure that we all get through the content we want to get to. So we're going to kick this thing right off. So thank you all for jumping on. I went on a walk this morning with a girlfriend and she asked me, she's like, are people still going to webinars? And I was like, well, apparently I've got 85 people registered for today. So somehow, some way, the webinars are still working. But just know that we are, as we get to the end of today, I am starting to think about ways to turn Lakeside into Lakeside Live. So watch for more Erin's brainchildren to come. Thankfully, I don't know if Kristen's on. Kristen's in Ireland right now. Thankfully, she just lets my creative genius sort of just continue, and so we'll see where it takes us. But with that said, we're going to jump off and start today's Lakeside Chat with the conversation of the dynamic duo between HR and finance. In particularly, as we talk about the idea of what I have affirmatively keep calling the chicken and egg. The chicken and egg of the idea of, do you need more people to be able to make more money, or do you need more money to be able to hire more people? And we're going to discuss that conversation in a lot of different ways here yet today. With that said, I'm running today's event a little differently than I have in prior events. So I'm going to run it like a talk show, because the 3 guests that I have on, I really want to make sure that they get their clear 15 minutes and that we get a chance to hear their particular stories in its formative right. Good Lord, this is going to be a day. So I talk about this being the chicken and egg of business. And so which one comes first, right? Do you need people or do you need money? So I went to the lovely gods of Google to get me started in terms of thinking through what would be the appropriate way for us to be thinking of it. So I went to our delightful friends of ChatGPT and asked, what are some good tips to hire when you know when you need to hire more employees? ChatGPT couldn't give me an answer. They were experiencing high demand at the time. They couldn't even give me an answer. I went to Google and asked, when do you need to add employees? You'll notice if you look at these articles, talking about layoffs, talking about business credit cards, not anything in particular around when you need to hire more employees. And then I asked just to say, hey, Google, literally went to my phone. I am a non-iPhone person. I went to my Google phone and said, hey, Google, how do I know when I need to add more employees? And even there, they really couldn't give me a good answer. So I found a really good article. I found one that even sounds specifically like it said, chicken or egg, how do you know when it's time to add more employees? But it was written in 2016. So the concept that we're talking about seems to be one that every employer thinks about. It's the idea of really, when do you know you need to add more employees? And yet at the same time, there doesn't seem to be a ton of really great or current content in terms of how does employers need to make those decisions. And I don't know about you, but since 2016, lots have happened in the world of business in terms of both economic changes, in terms of how the work gets done. You throw AI into the mix. We're in a position where we recognize that a lot has changed, and yet the content hasn't given us any updates in terms of what do we need to do. So instead, I am going to go to the experts here and talk to my 3 friends that I have on with the call today. So for today's Lakeside Chat, we've got my friend Paige, CFO of Ambient Consulting. Paige, do you want to introduce yourself? Give me a break, give my voice a break.
Yes, I would love to give your voice a break. So I'm Paige Batcha. I am the CFO of Ambient Consulting. We're an IT consulting and solutions organization based in Minnetonka, Minnesota. My background has been within finance for a number of years, coupled with a few years in recruiting as well. So definitely have a completely different viewpoint stepping back into the finance field. But excited to be here. I've worked alongside and with HR for almost my entire career. So excited to have a conversation today, Erin.
Yeah, no, I think your dynamic of where you've come from and where you are really sort of lends your voice to this conversation really clearly. Next up, we've got my friend Abby. Abby Rooney, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Abby Rooney. I'm the COO and Director of HR at law firm Foley and Mansfield. We are a national law firm that started in the Twin Cities, and we now have 13 locations around the country. So I think I'm sort of the opposite of Paige in this group. So I'm mostly from an HR background, and within the last few years, I've been more involved in other areas of the business, including accounting. And I think my accounting counterpart at my firm would say I know just enough to be dangerous.
Well, and I think it's interesting because you wear that COO hat too at the same time, right? So you're at the table when these conversations are happening, and which is why, again, I really think that it'll be interesting to hear your counterpoint to what Paige has to say. And last but most definitely not least, my friend Shawndel Spader. Well, you introduce yourself. I'm happy to talk about you, but you can introduce yourself.
Sounds good, Erin. Thank you. So I'm Shawndel Spader, CEO of Spader Group, and we are a financial solutions agency that supports businesses with being able to know their numbers and understand the finances of their business to be able to make some of these decisions. This is one that we work with clients all the time on, what's my next move? Do I bring somebody in or do I not? So when Erin asked me to be here, I was like, oh, I don't know that I know it all, but I could definitely shed, some of our tips and tricks and things that we're paying attention to. So I'm excited to be here. So thank you, Erin, for the invite.
We're excited to have you. All right. So many of you have been on the webinars in the past. And so I want to just do a quick reminder of how I run what I keep referring to as my underproduced webinars of rules of engagement. So again, you've already seen mics can turn on and off. Brian, thank you for being my guinea pig to show that mics can be turned on and off. I want to be in a position where we recognize that this is underproduced for a reason. We want this to feel real time and give you guys an opportunity to feel like you can get your voice included in the conversation. So use the team features as much as you want throughout use chat, use your hand raise, comment, share as you need to. I want you to make sure we're engaging as much as possible. I'll do my best to make sure I'm managing chat and comments along the way. I may also along the way recognize comments that are coming through and ask you to also turn yourself off mic, turn your mic on and add your story and your voice to the conversation as well. So be prepared. Sarah, thank you for getting the chat started. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I will bring it up. I think one of the things Abby said I want to just make sure that we allude to is, or even what Shawndel just referred to, is many times there's no right answer. We aren't here to say that we have all the answers for this particular topic. We are here to create conversation and to create discussion around the conversation altogether. And so we're hoping that if nothing else, you walk away with ideas or things to try or things to consider. But by no means is this any element of a silver bullet in terms of where we're going to take this. And so we just want this to feel positive, offer insight, and give you guys an opportunity to shed your voice to a conversation that, in my opinion, many people are having, and there's not enough content out there to be able to feel good about. And like I said, so apparently I had one more bullet and I missed it. All right, so in the interest of getting you guys used to using your Teams chat features, this one's for you guys here as participants. So whether you're in HR, whether you're in finance, or whether you're altogether something different, what metrics are you in particular using, or you're paying attention to recognize or to signal that your organization is going through growth or might need to add to the organization? So as I wait for you guys to enter chat, Abby, how about you? Any immediate, one answer, if you would just say, what metric do you use? What metric are you looking at?
We might look at something like overtime. Has there been a spike in a certain department?
Yeah, it's a great one. Paige, what do you say?
Mine is year-over-year growth.
Nice. Is there a percentage? Is there a particular, is it percentage? Is it ratio? What would you use in that space?
It can be both. You're taking away my thunder as we move into the next questions.
Shawndel, what do you got? We really take a look at our billable and non-billable hours compared to what our team has decided for their own capacity. So we have full-time and part-time employees. So we're taking, what's the total amount of bandwidth that we have available compared to what's being utilized.
Yeah, there's a couple good ones that are coming up in chat as well. So we've got turnover, which is a great one. Obviously, paying attention to turnover is a good number to pay attention to. Book to bill ratio is another good one. So that kind of where are we at in terms of kind of that capacity planning piece of it. Customer growth, where are we at customer lines. Sales engagement, which I think is another interesting one, because again, now you're not just looking at actuals, but you're looking at forecasting to be able to say, okay, based on forecast, what are we going to be able to manage to that particular capacity? These are great, which is awesome. But to Paige's point, I don't want to steal her thunder. I know we've got good content coming. So for my very first guest here today, let's start talking. Paige Batcha. All right, first question. We're going to talk about that relationship between HR and finance. So in your experience working in finance, what has been the best or worst working relationship that you've had with your HR counterpart?
So I have numerous stories. And as I was thinking about this question, there were two concepts that came top of mind, and it's trust and communication. And trust is a big word. But you know, if you don't have this built trust with your HR counterpart, it's how much information are they sharing with you or withholding, and how much information are you sharing and withholding? Just making sure that you're having open dialogue. This is a very sensitive area. Both of these departments within an organization deal with highly confidential information in different capacities. And so it's that element of sharing enough so that you can work together, but then also making sure that you're not sharing too much. And so that you're recognizing that there still is this element of confidentiality. So I will say that I wanted to share this story very high level. My worst experience was when I learned way too much information than what it is that I needed to know. And so in that conversation or in that sharing, I knew that I couldn't trust that individual, because if they were sharing this information and didn't know their boundaries, what else was going on and what other information was being shared with other people outside of the two of us. But my best relationship on the flip side was we had structured meetings, we sat down, we had a list, but it was very open in terms of, here's what I'm seeing. I don't know this. Can you help me? Can we learn together? Can we get through this together? It was very much a trusting teamwork mentality of, I don't have all the answers. To your point, we don't have all the answers collectively on this call, but how are we going to work together to get to our same shared goal and objective, which is moving the business forward? So everything is going to come down to trust and truly open lines of communication.
Yeah, I think that's good, because I think about it. I mean, it's like any relationship at that point, right? I mean, they say that all the time, right? Pay attention to the people of, if someone's telling them something and they're talking about something, then you're in a position to say, that's giving me a great gauge on whether or not they're truly a trustworthy counterpart. And I think that same rule applies, especially when you're, to your point, in that confidential space between the two parties that are essentially managing the full back office of a business.
Yeah, I mean, there's still elements that I don't need to know. And so for that, don't share it with me, because that is between you as an HR individual and whoever you've had that information shared with you. That should stay confidential, because that is your role, I believe, as an HR individual, is to be a trusted go-to person for very confidential conversations. And so knowing when it's appropriate to bring your finance people in, because there is a reason to bring them in from a decision-making standpoint. But that doesn't just happen from the very beginning, from the first time that you start working together. It's absolutely developed over time.
Totally. Okay, so we're gonna go back to that metrics piece of it. So again, chicken, egg. What process do you, so again, from the CFO seat, what process do you go through to decide or to approve the addition of headcount?
Yeah, it's a topic and conversation that at Ambient we are having on a daily basis. I don't have all of the answers. I will say that I am a big believer in failing fast and taking calculated risks. But as I was, going through and creating notes on this, it's all about your risk tolerance as an organization. Who are your stakeholders? What is their risk tolerance? Are they one that really just wants to step on the gas and they'll take as many risks as possible? Or are they very conservative and want to proof everything out before they make a hire? But there's elements of market conditions that you need to be looking at. And there's industry trends as well. So within the IT consulting industry, how many players do we have in the market? Are we looking to go outside of where we're currently housed? What can the market bear? How many more players can you put into that? Because as you expand beyond potentially your local headquarters in Minneapolis per se, you have to add people. And so you need to be looking at the holistic picture of, does it make sense? Does it make sense to add people sporadically throughout the US? And then we had talked, what came top of mind when you asked me in the previous slide is all about customer concentration. And that leads into everything that I just said. Are you concentrated in 5 customers? Well, that's a really risky portfolio. And so I would, encourage, expanding beyond that and trying to diversify your portfolio. Because if you lose one customer, it's a very risky business model. But usually to get into more customers, it means you have to have more people. So it all goes back to how much risk can the business tolerate, the shareholders or stakeholders, how much risk do they want to tolerate as well? So those are my very high level metrics and viewpoints on what I would be looking at.
I want to dive into one of the things that you just said. So market conditions. It's this delightfully big blanketed answer to say market conditions. Yeah. And you've been in a couple different industries, right? You've been on the professional services side and you've not been in the professional services side. So are there different market conditions that you pay attention to based on the industry that you're supporting?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So in previous life, when I was in professional services, I focused primarily within the finance and accounting sector. As many people may or may not know, that is a very hard world to find people and to find workers. And so that market condition has opened up a whole lot of players to be able to help fill the gap that's there. And now within the IT sector, that is all about making sure we're alongside companies that are innovative. And so innovative traditionally will go hand in hand with being able to establish lines of financing. Well, we all know that the banking industry has been disruptive. And so, yes, you look at things differently, but I will say that one thing leads to the next thing that leads to the next thing. And so not just focusing on one specific element, but really thinking through, who is my target market? What would my target market perhaps be experiencing currently, and also reflect from a personal standpoint as well, because there is a whole lot of personal elements, especially over the last few years, that has also played out within the business landscape as well. Financing is a very easy thing to talk about. I mean, financing from a personal standpoint and from a business standpoint, both have seen a lot of ups and downs over the last few years.
Yeah, no, and I mean that's part of it, right? Is not. I mean, I like that juxtaposition between both the risk tolerance piece of it and then the predictive analytics piece of it, right? There's how much are we willing to take on, and how much can we sort of use as based of those prior predictors or based on what's happening in the kind of our outside world. So what are we willing to do inside, and then kind of how much of the outside can we use as a guide as well. Yeah. All right, let's go back to kind of that, and maybe you'll steal some stuff from what you said in the first question, but so knowing that, kind of knowing all of the players and knowing the relationship and the importance between the relationship between finance and HR, what advice do you give to finance leaders, so your counterparts in finance, to help build a bridge or to help build that working relationship with your HR counterparts? And I think it's interesting because you've kind of sat with the straddled role for a long time.
Yeah. And I will say that I speak a foreign language. Finance people speak a foreign language, and not everybody understands what it is that we're saying or trying to convey. So for many years, I've been working on crafting, how do I convey in layman's terms? But layman's terms honestly mean something different to all different departments. But my biggest piece of advice is to just pause to educate, but then also pause to listen. And so the education piece is, you want to be able to be heard. And so how can I convey what it is that I want my individual on the other side to hear? And I need to convey it in a way that they are going to understand and they are going to hear it. And that may not be the same as how I receive information as well. So just taking a moment to pause to understand, what is it I'm trying to convey? How does this individual hear information? and then be able to move forward in the dialogue. But the element of pause is huge to just think through things, because it can be very frustrating for anybody who has children trying to talk to children and they don't get it. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm dealing with children, but I'm just saying, even as a mom, I have to pause and say, how are my kids going to understand what it is that I'm asking of them? And so it's a skill I've been trying to work on, of pausing, thinking through how I can articulate this in a manner of which the individual on the other side will hear it. And it's no different than working in the business world as well. And then the last thing I'll say is just pausing to listen. That's another skill that I would highly recommend individuals to keep working on.
I struggle with both of those, so I wrote it down. I circled it twice. So good words of advice. But maybe mostly as a mom, I've had like 2 days where I've wanted to throw both of my children through windows. So like I think maybe that's probably good for me to hear from both lens. Thank you, Paige. I want to just sort of throw, and I should have said this in the beginning. I've organized today's event so that we've got time at the end to do some Q&A. So if you want to pose questions in chat throughout, we'll bring those back up at the end. So again, I'm running it on the front end like a Jimmy Fallon show, but I'll run it on the back end like an Oprah Winfrey show, so that the audience gets a chance to participate and ask questions as we go throughout. Thank you, Paige. All right, so my next guest, Miss Abby Rooney. For those of you that are on the call, and Abby, obviously you've seen these questions. These questions are going to look pretty similar, with a lovely little twist. Because again, to Abby's point on the front end, she sits on the other side of the house. And so we wanted to just dive with the same sort of idea of questions, but ask finance and then ask HR. So Abby, in your experience in HR, what has been your best or worst working relationship with your finance counterpart?
Okay, so I'm going to tell a little bit of a story that starts with some mutual frustration and ends with, a happy ending that we continue to correct. My current counterpart and I, we were both, we worked together very, very well, but I will tell you that it didn't start out on such perfect footing. I think we went from, our departments that we own. So if it's HR for me and accounting for her, we were probably for a while, kind of redoing each other's work at times, reframing things. And then we started to realize that. And so then we would ask each other things like, well, why did you do that? Or why did you take what was given to you and completely redo it? And I would get a similar question, right? And so we took that and we evolved to where we currently are, which is, instead of mutual frustration, it's mutual respect. And it is, we both say to ourselves, before I do this, before I start on X, Y, and Z, I'm going to check in and get her input, because I know it's going to be really valuable at the end of my project. So I'd rather get it up front. So I would say that, it's become a really great relationship. And, similar to so many things that Paige has already mentioned, the trust, and respect, and just knowledge that everything or many things that the HR department does will ultimately affect accounting. Just having that knowledge makes me think, before I do. So that's been our relationship.
I love that that piece of it, right? Because part of it's the idea of bringing them in early. So when I many moons ago, when I worked on the consulting side and was helping people with HR tech decisions, right? Like, hey, we know we needed new HR systems. Let's start an RFP. One of my very first questions along the way was, do we have do we have a finance SME to be a part of that sits alongside you through this process? Because one, it's going to cost a lot of money, right? The system itself is going to be expensive. And then the other part of it too is all these things sort of run through down to finance, right? So as soon as you get their buy-in on the front end, the process went so much simpler,
Right.
even in that process, even in that space. So I can totally get what you're saying, is the idea of getting to the point where then you guys are almost like creating it on the front end, that you almost have like synergy on the front end before you move through the process. So you're not bringing somebody along 12 steps or 2 steps into it.
That's right.
So then, again, similar question. So thinking the chicken egg and then thinking about those metrics, what metric conversation are you guys having when you're looking at adding headcount? And I know this is fun because you talked about this as the softer side when we were prepping for this. So let's talk, what's the softer metrics we should be looking at?
Well, you know, I'm also in professional services, and so there's the client service side, which, you know, is going to be dependent on what our business is doing at any given moment. But I would say that I have found that there are people who work in professional services who tend to have a lot of longevity. So when we do have turnover, it's often after several years. And I think one thing that has been a really good process for us is we look at any position, and we really try to consider, you know, do we need to replace this position? Does it need to be replaced in exactly the same way? Or have we, you know, evolved beyond maybe the person who held the position for a while? Maybe their skill set was different than what we could, how we could handle the tasks today. You know, we also have this incredibly flexible national company that, you know, we have people working in different cities. We're a primarily remote firm at this point, and so we do have the ability to move work from people around the country. So, you know, I like to keep in touch with my office managers from around the firm to see, you know, do you have somebody who's just not particularly busy right now because we have an opening, and I wonder if we can move some of the work over to that person. So that's that. Like, again, we kind of carefully examine each opening, because I think the instinct is to say, well, you know, we need to replace Sally. Sally's been working here forever. Surely there must be something that is, you know, needs to be replaced. And sometimes that's the answer, yes. And other times it is that we don't need to do that, or we need to do it in a different way.
Yeah. So I know this is off script, but I'm curious just because we talked about sort of this evolution. I mean, when you look at that article of 2016 to, you know, 2024, where we are today, and that concept of remote work, which 2016 wasn't nearly as much of a thing. Are there any other sort of tips and tricks? So again, other than, and I loved what you said about the idea of like tapping into other markets when the roles open up. Has there been any other sort of things that you've used, or sort of any maybe even growing pains that you guys have gone through as we consider sort of that change to remote work? Sorry to throw a curveball at you.
I mean, just like several organizations, we've had to just really get intentional about communication. So, you know, I would say most of my calendar is phone calls and meetings, and a lot of the things I talk about with different stakeholders will probably be repetitive. So I would say there's a lot more coordination and just being, again, intentional about coordinating those things. And again, like I said to you the other day, I mean, this, you know, it's not a hard metric thing. It's more of a soft skill or soft approach, but just keeping everybody in the loop, asking some tough questions. You know, a lot of the times I find that people are, you know, emotional about some of their employees or about their working relationship. And again, you know, to say to somebody that's been in a role for however long, I mean, we might not replace you. Like that's sort of an emotional decision to make and message to send. So it's a lot of communication, explanation, sharing more about what we're going for, why we're looking to do this, that sort of thing.
Oh, I love that. Okay, so then that last question, what advice when you're networking and talking to your HR peers, what advice would you give to HR leadership to be able to build that working relationship with their finance counterparts?
Well, and I want to just say I was kind of, laughing a little bit to myself when Paige was sharing her point of view, because while we did meet briefly to talk about this event, we did not exchange information about what we were each going to say. So it's really great that we both have some similar points. And so to my HR friends, I will say, it is your role, it is your business to learn how to speak the same language, or how an accounting department might use phrases or words that aren't something that you're as used to using. So, when you say budget, what does that mean? When you say forecast, what does that mean? Because I think there's a lot of different ways to interpret that if you're not in that space. I think I will say, share information. Don't wait until they ask questions. If they're asking a question, it's because something already happened. They're looking at, they're looking at the month that already occurred, or the year that already is closed, and they're asking questions. That means we probably didn't share enough information last year or last month. So share it ahead of time. To give an example, we got a notification a couple of weeks ago from a vendor that said, yada, 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 we're raising our prices starting July 1st by 10%. And, I made sure that I shared that with my counterpart right away, because that's something that they're going to need to plan for. Another thing for us non-accounting folk, be aware of timing. So what are the cutoffs for things like month end? When are the busy times? I think year end has some really different connotations for an HR department than an accounting department. So what are those cutoffs? Are you taking time away during an audit, like that they might have questions to bring you in on? Just, again, communicate those things. In short, try to make their lives easier. And again, if you have the opportunity to get to know somebody and work with somebody where you can start to bounce ideas off of them and get their perspective early, you'll probably A, have a much better result in the end, and B, there'll be things involved that you probably didn't think of the first time. So I think there's nothing but good that can come from having a solid working relationship with accounting and finance.
I love that. I love the idea of the timing piece of it, because I agree with you wholeheartedly, right? Like when HR feels busy, or when what might feel like the busy times in HR doesn't always match up to the busy times across the business, or specifically in finance. So I love making sure that you have that sort of calendared mindset around when timing is affected. I think that's very good. Very good.
I would also like to point out that some of these lessons have been learned the hard way. So don't make the same mistakes that I have. Learn from my wisdom.
Thank you, Abby.
Mm-hmm.
Well, good. Well, again, we're going to keep you guys have questions, continue to put them in chat. If they come up, we'll make sure that we bring them back up as we get to the end. But I want to throw one more shout out to the group here too. So I'm curious, just because again, as I've done business processing mapping sessions with organizations when we were building out HR systems, and even as I've worked here, even as we think through Lakeside's growth, does your current organization have a formal process for requesting headcount? And so this is the idea is there a form in your HR system? Is there a template you have to use? Is there a metric that you need to provide when you're asking leadership? So I'm curious, as I'm throwing this out there, do you have a formal process? So again, use chat, use comments. You got, I'm curious to hear what everyone else is thinking here. Paige at Ambient, do you guys have a formal process for requesting headcount?
Not documented. We do have a
Okay.
process in terms of who needs to sign off on it, but we don't have a documented formal process yet.
Yeah. Abby, how
Ours
about you?
isn't
Is there a formal
documented either,
process?
Paige.
Oh, go ahead, Shawndel.
Said ours isn't documented either. I wasn't gonna let her live on that like string all by herself.
You're not alone. Abby, how about you? Do you guys have a formal process for headcount?
I mean, I don't think I'd describe it as formal, but yes, we do have an approval process, and it usually involves a lot of what I've explained, a lot of the softer questions, I guess.
Yeah. I'm going to be honest. We don't either. I think the idea of it is, I think there's like this grand idea that it sounds really great to have this formal process for having headcount brought on board. I don't think a lot of even big organizations do in its truest form. And I think part of it, to your point, Abby, is there is that softer conversation. Then you throw in the mix of like, I don't know. I didn't think to talk to, what did you use? Sally and Shirley. I didn't think to talk to Shirley over there to see if she has the availability to take on X, Y, and Z. But I think to your point, Paige, usually there is just a formal who signs off on it, like with a buck stops here process, if nothing else. I know we're getting a couple that are coming through and a couple questions that we'll bring up as we get to it. So thank you, Leilani, and thank you, Dan, for jumping in on chat. My final guest. So you are the comic relief. You're you're the comedy act or the musical guest. Isn't that how that works, Shawndel? The last guest is usually is Shawndel Spader. And your questions look a little different because again, your role is helping organizations make this decision. Kind of what is the and I go back to my MBA accounting class. That might have been my least favorite class I ever took in school. But I'm curious just as we think about it. So first question for you, when working with a business that's in growth mode, what best practices are you encouraging them to have set up and to have them be thinking about when they know it's time to add an employee? And I think about this both in the lens of a big employer, but also in particular, the lens of the small employer. Yeah,
so I can speak mostly to the small employer or like, again, that $1 million in revenue range, slightly above, slightly below. As we're looking at best practices, it really starts ahead of, are we ready to add employees or not? And it's really understanding the financial health of the business. So if somebody comes and they say, chicken or egg, right? I don't know if I can afford to hire somebody. I need to hire somebody so I can support more work and earn more revenue, all of those things. We really back up and make sure that the financial information is crystal clear. Because when we have that financial information that's crystal clear, it's no longer about emotion. When these questions come up and people are starting these conversations, it's from a place of, I'm so overwhelmed by my business. I don't understand. Like, I need help. I need help. I need help. But it's not always clear as to what I need help means. So when we can back it up into, okay, here's the financial health. Here's where you've been. Here's what you've accomplished. You've accomplished, this level of revenue, this level of support to your clients with this size team, right? This size of client base. And we can break that down and kind of find some of those averages of, on average, a client at this level brings in this much revenue and takes this much support from our staff or from our teams, right? So as we're breaking that down, we have a better understanding when we don't start with this exact question of, can I add or should I add? It's, when does it make sense? Because my numbers and my metrics now are telling me facts versus I feel overwhelmed or I feel like things are, over or under. I feel like we don't have enough work to keep people busy. Do I do a layoff? I mean, it goes in the same direction for that conversation as well, which is exactly opposite of even this question. So it's backing up and really understanding the numbers through and through, not just about employees, but overall for the business and where you've been and where you're at. Aligning that also with the goals. Because when we know those metrics in the ahead part, right, where again, to generate this much in revenue for each client takes this much workload, this much time, expense, all of that from our staff support, then we can say, okay, we can take on 3 more clients at this level with the team we have. If we know that we're going to expand beyond that quickly, then we know we need to hire. And, you know, then what's the projection then of how far are we going? You know, is it we want to bring on 10 new clients before the end of the year? Great. We need to start staffing for that to make sure that the capacity is there. The other metric that we're watching in that space is really looking at what's the learning curve. Everybody comes in with skills, but everybody
Right.
has to learn the position. Everybody has to learn the company that they're working for. And while they come in with these skills, I haven't had anybody yet who could totally hit the ground running without some variation of training, right?
Right.
So sometimes you can make that training, you know, some industries, some companies can make it a couple of weeks and people are ready to go. Others are months. So we take that into account as well as to how quickly are we deciding we need to hire, we need to bring somebody on. And just because we decide to hire, unfortunately, we all, I think, have probably experienced this by now, but just because we decided today that we need to hire does not mean we're going to have somebody hired by the end of the month anymore, right? Like
Right.
there used to be a day where we could put an ad out. Within a couple of days, we had 5 candidates, qualified candidates, and within a week, we had somebody hired. We're not finding that anymore today. I'm guessing that's probably similar across many industries, but it's taking that factor into it as well to say, okay, how much future planning do we need to put into this?
No, I love that. And it hasn't been brought up yet, right? Is that the labor market piece of how it plays into this part of it. There's a degree of like how quickly, and at some point we're going to go back. Leilani, I hope you stay on because I really want to go back to your question from a couple different reasons. But the idea of it is not just, I love those pieces of it. Like how hard is the job? How hard is it going to be to get someone trained and up to speed? Do we think that there's a labor market out there that we maybe can avoid some of that training? And if not, how much it goes back to Paige's risk tolerance piece of it too, of being able to say, how much of a risk are we willing to take to get someone on board to think that we can train them? Because I think that is kind of perfectly, whether I knew it or not. I mean, I'm an evil genius here, right? This was Paige's comment, and then you go to the Abby's piece of being able to sort of that soft skill part of it, of bleeding those two pieces together. It's that part of it, as well as recognizing those market conditions that even Paige mentioned in the past. All right, so brass tacks, is there any particular ratios, thresholds, metrics that when you're, I mean, I'll be honest, you sat down with Lakeside to have that conversation when we've gotten to that place where, you know, we're into quarter one, we had a really good Q1, and we're starting to recognize that like, hey, some of us are starting to feel stretched. Are there metrics or rules of thumb that you're using to say, yeah, this, you're now at a place, put that job posting, I grant you, I wave my magic Shawndel wand and allowing you to put a head count out there.
You make that magic wand hire people.
Yeah. I mean,
So, right. So it really is, it's utilizing the data. Like I might sound like a broken record, but it's really when we have that data crystal clear, we're able to decide at what % of capacity usage and availability, right? Are we looking at saying, you know, right now, if I know that my training is going to take us 3 months, like I need to plan for what's going to be happening 3 months from now. And I also have to look at the risk side of it and say, can we support 3 months of potentially not billable wages, right?
yeah.
So when we're looking at the metrics there, it's having it available in a systematic formula that makes sense for each of our companies, each of our clients, each of, you know, for everybody on their own, because even out of the 4 of us, like our needs are very, very different. So our formulas will look very, very different, you know, when you put all the pieces together, right? So for us personally, when we have reached 20% availability for capacity, we start hiring. We are actively, because our hiring, it has become so much longer, that hiring process, the training process is actually shortened a little bit, but the hiring timeline from when we decide to post versus actually getting somebody here seems to be longer right now. So now we're deciding, do we need to move that 20%? We have 20% available, which means I don't have to stop selling, right? I can still generate new sales and bring people, new clients in, but I can bring in way fewer than if we had a full bandwidth, right?
Yeah.
So ours is currently 20%. That might be changing to 25. It might be 30. I don't think it's 30, but you know, and again, that calculated risk then is if I know that we're going to extend this period, when we do get somebody here, like that's why we focus so much on shortening the training bit. We've documented, we've streamlined, we've done a lot of work in that space because the one space that right now that we can't control is a lot of that timeline between decision of yes, we need to hire and actually having somebody here.
This is all really good stuff. And I think the one thing as I'm hearing it is we all kind of do come up from a professional services. So if there's anybody on the chat that would like to add any additional color from a non-professional services vein, I welcome it. I'm going to go a little off script if you're okay, because one of the things that I'm seeing as sort of this recurring theme in the chat right now is planned budget. And the process of that planning on the front end. And honestly, Shawndel, I'm not trying to take away your time, but Paige, Abby, feel free to take yourself off mute and answer this question as well, because I don't want to lose it. So some of the conversations we've had thus far have kind of been the just-in-time hire. Hey, we're turnovers at such and such just put in their notice and we need to backfill that role. What about that process on the front end, the planning for headcount? Do you have any advice or sort of metrics or ideas as to how you approach that conversation or how you go into that budgeting conversation for that planning for future headcount? And Shawndel, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so as we're planning for it, we're matching up. What's the goal? What's the goal between now and the end of the year? What's the 3-year goal? What's the 5-year goal? And we'll work that backwards from, again, when we know what it takes to support, you know, a client at X revenue versus the expense from a team support, we can work it backwards from I want to earn $1 million in revenue. I want to earn $2 million in revenue. You know, again, break that back to say, okay, that means this many clients at average of this level. And at that level, we need this much staff support to be able to do that. So when we're budgeting that in, of course, if we're going to take a business from, say, $1 million plan to a $2 million plan, that doesn't happen overnight. So then we're looking at how do we break that down systematically so that we can gradually get up to that, not burn our teams out. Because if we grow too fast, that is such a huge risk for burnout. And when we're looking at that, we want to be able to bring new clients on in a systematic way, in a way that truly supports them. So when we're budgeting and planning for this, again, we're taking all of those risk analysis. We're taking we can support the non-billable for this amount of time. We're building in that timeline. Just because we build it today, though, and this is where a lot of times we see people get really frustrated with budgets and they throw them out the window, is because we built it today. If something doesn't go as we originally planned, we throw it out the window versus recalculating, right? So we don't throw the GPS out if it doesn't know where it's going. We calibrate it, right? So it's kind of that same thing of we need to take a look at it when it's not working or something has drastically changed. We revisit it. Sometimes people are like, well, that just means that I can change my budget whenever I want. No, that's not actually the case, but we're changing it based on need because things are different. You know, when you know more and have different facts, different reasoning needs to be applied.
Yeah. Paige, Abby, anything you'd add to that insight there?
It was exactly what I was going to say, just in different words. I've said it many times here as I've built budgets. It's the best budget with the known information at that point in time, right? And so then your budget only gets better as time progresses and you live through it. So finance isn't always known for being flexible. So having flexibility in conversations is absolutely what I would tell finance people to start learning to have with, you know, your stakeholders within the organization. But then it's coupled with the conversation. Let's have the conversation that takes in all of the factors, the market, what are you trying to accomplish with this? And then as you're looking to grow, there is that ramp up period and it all gets back to risk. But as long as you are going into it, having had the conversations, had as much of the facts as you possibly can and make an informed decision. I mean, there is no crystal ball. I mean, if we did, I don't think we'd be sitting on this webinar because we'd be running these Fortune billion-dollar companies, right? I mean, there's no crystal ball. And so it's just having
Right.
these very candid conversations and saying, okay, well, this is what I think. What do you think? And then listening to all of the different inputs into it and making your best decision at that point in time. But yeah, to say that the budget as of 1/1 is going to be exactly how the rest of the year is going to go, I mean, that would be fantastic, but that is not reality.
Abby, what would you say? Anything you'd add?
There's really nothing to add except for I've heard those exact words come out of the mouth of my accounting counterpart, which is this was the best information I had at the time.
I say that about a lot of things in life, right? Like I am making the best decision based on the information I have available at the time. And I feel like there are words to live by. That is words to live by. Okay. So this is a combination. This last question is good because I think this also leans into what Leilani had asked earlier. So we'll go back to that piece of it too, is what advice do you give to a company who wants to grow, who wants to add headcount but can't afford it? Are there any sort of like, sorry, but Shawndel?
Not a big fan of sorry, but. And the reason I'm not is because we had a client come to us a few years ago and his bookkeeping finance team truly looked at it. She fired him and she looked at him and said, you might as well back up the truck, load up everything you actually own and shut it all down because this is a sinking ship. That was 5 years ago and he's crushing it today. And we didn't do that work, but we sat alongside of him in that trench of, I mean, it was a bad scenario, don't get me wrong, but instead of saying you can't afford it, we said, how can we afford it, right? Mm-hmm. Like, how can we make this a reality? It's not, how can I make this a reality tomorrow? How can I make it a reality in a month? It's how can we make it a reality and what needs to be true? So what kind of revenue needs to be true? What kind of, again, when we're looking at the revenue and the expense, like that all needs to be budgeted and makes sense. If we're only earning $1,000, like our expenses can't be $850 and expect us to be profitable long term, right? Sure, there's $150, but a guarantee that's already spent in overhead that wasn't considered, right?
Right.
So it's looking at, we can't afford it today, but how can we make this a reality and how long will that take? Maybe somebody comes and they say, you know what, I have to make this a reality in a year. Great. This is what that picture looks like. To get there, you need to earn X. To get, you have to be able to support this kind of expense. When we break it down, if they come to me with I need this done in a year, I will break it down in that manner. All too often, that number, it just isn't feasible because the person themselves or the team that they have at hand is not available with that kind of capacity to make that happen. But what that practice does is it shows them the idea isn't irrelevant or wrong or impossible. The timeline does not allow for it to be possible. So instead of shutting it down, it actually gives them a little bit of encouragement to say, okay, if I can remain, as Paige said, flexible, right? Like not usually a term that we use over on this side, but truly, if we can remain flexible in the timeline, we get really clear on what the outcome is, we can make that work out. And then again, throughout that path, maybe things go a little faster than anticipated to begin with, but then they fall flat for a little while. And it's really aligning with the team. So can I dive into kind of Liliani's question here?
Yeah, actually, let me look, and I'm going to let her go. I want to make sure she gets her question worded the way she wants it worded. Leilani, do you mind going off of taking the mic off and asking it your way?
Oh, sure. Happy to. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the conversation. This has been insightful. Leilani Blomquist, I'm just curious around fractional. I feel like I've been hearing a lot more people wanting to lean into fractional and step into it. I've played fractional type of roles with companies. However, they don't generally use that terminology. But when I talk to fractional, so like you're actually doing fractional work in my consulting practice. But I'm not sure how often it's something that's talked about within like the HR and finance groups or leaned into, or if there's some still maybe concerns or biases around full-time versus fractional. So honestly, I'm just curious around when and where, or have the idea of fractional support when you're in those times of wanting some of that expertise in leadership and support, but not quite ready to pull the trigger on like an FTE, right? And like full comp package. So I'm honest. Yeah, I'm just curious, like, is that a topic that comes up often? In what way, shape, or form is it received or discussed?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And obviously, I would love to answer all of this because obviously that's one of our areas of expertise is HR fractional. But do you mind, Abby, I want to kick it off to you first, just because I think, one, you've been in your role the longest. So you've been, and I think it's legal, right? So you've got a little more like the structure of the what you do. It looks a little different than potentially something else. So kind of how has the use of the phrase or as the option of gig or fractional work being looked at within at Foley Mansfield?
Well, I can tell you that quite recently we have been working with a company on a fractional basis to help us with some marketing or business development work. And the decision to do that was more of a, we knew that we needed to sort of make some changes, kind of pivot, kind of double down in a different way in that area. And we felt like we needed an expert, and we also felt like hiring somebody with the level of expertise that we were looking for was, probably going to be out of our long-term budget. So we did it and we've started in a fractional manner. So that's one example.
Yeah. Paige, how about you? And I know you come into this is another one of those areas where there is a degree that is what you do, right? You're on the IT side. That is part of your, how you work. But is it something that you're also leaning into internally?
Yes. So past life has me being a believer in this. And currently I have individuals that are helping from a marketing standpoint, from an accounting standpoint, because we are growing and I don't know what we need. Simply put, I don't know what I need for future. I will always recommend that people hire for future state. But again, I don't have a crystal ball, so we're learning very quickly as our organization evolves rapidly, and roles and responsibilities are changing. Automation is happening, so there's so much that's going on, and so the most financially sound thing for me to do and the best thing to do from an employee engagement standpoint is to bring on someone for the specified role that I need right now. And so,
Right.
Yes, I utilize it. It's helped tremendously. And bringing in someone who has that specialized skill set, that ramp up period is minimized, to maybe a week. Sometimes it's not even that. And so I'm getting
Right.
the output that I need in the areas that I need the most support in the quickest fashion. The other comment I'll make, and then I'll let Shawndel answer it as well, is I always want to encourage people to repurpose people that are within the organization. Think outside of the box. Think outside of what they're doing today and look at the skills that they bring to the table. And are there other ways that you can utilize those skills in different fashions? Or train them. There's a lot more to that conversation, right? But just always look to see if you can repurpose people that are internal.
Shawndel, what advice do you give to organizations as they're asking that question? And when does fractional make sense? And we have a minute. Actually, we don't even have a minute. We have to quick.
All right, so fractional, we love it here. We work with a lot of clients that utilize fractional. We come in as fractional for a lot of people. I would say if we're looking at the return on investment, is I like to go with fractional organizations or support teams that will help teach me, teach the client, teach the person, so that it doesn't have to be I'm married to this solution long-term necessarily. But I'm not saying you can't build great relationships in that space. You can, and there are definitely places to do it. But I like to have that understanding so that if we wanted to bring it in-house, or if we wanted to be thinking for ourselves in a greater capacity, so that, like Paige said, I don't know what I need. we can start to think about what do we need so that when we're going back to the table with the fractional person, we're coming back with more intelligent conversations as we continue to work together. We're coming back as we're growing personally. So I put a lot of weight in the ability and willingness to teach and train and just share knowledge.
Awesome. Well, thank you, all three of you. And thank you all for staying on. We started at 37. We are ending at 37 people on. So we were able to keep a good audience throughout the whole thing. So thank you all for being here. Leilani, I hope that answers your question. Just so everyone knows, so I will be keeping the Lakeside Chats going next month. We will do Moms at Work. So in tribute to Mother's Day for next month, I've got 3 really great organizations that are coming on to talk about how organizations can best support moms at work. But I'm now, because they've already been tipped off, June's event is going to be called WTF, When to Fractional. So in the interest of a really great softball that I did not tell Leilani to ask, when I watch for more information, the June event is going to be specifically on the conversation of when to fractional and when to think about fractional. So watch for more information. Thank you all. Thank you all for being here. My voice made it. I want to just sort of applaud my voice I went off mute only 3 times to cough. And thank you guys for being here. I really appreciate it. And thank you all for joining. This has been Lakeside Chats. I don't have a really great send off like the good talk show hosts do, but thanks you guys.
Thank you.
Bye guys.